Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 books that I've read so far this year. So last year in June, I did a top 5 Wednesday where I ranked the top 5 books that I'd read so far that year, and I decided that this year I wanted to do that again, but I decided not to rank it, but rather to do it in chronological order. That way it will at least a little bit leave the suspense alive once I do my rankings at the end of the year for all of the books that I read in 2016. However, if you really do want to see my current rankings, I do have full rankings of every single book that I've read so far this year up on my Goodreads, so you can check my Goodreads down in the description. So like I said, this will be going from the one that I read first through the one that I read most recently, rather than my favorite to least favorite out of the 5. Also, brief shout out to Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which I reread in May. If that was the first time I'd read this, this would definitively be on the list, but since it was a reread, I'm not counting it, but obviously this is 10 stars out of 10. This is one of my absolute favorite books. So the first book on this list is one that I read right at the beginning of February, and that is The Chimes by Anna Smale. The Chimes was released last year, and it was actually longlisted for the Man Booker, and when I heard the premise of the book, I immediately went to the book depository and purchased a copy. Essentially, this book is a fantasy dystopian set in England that revolves around music. I have just said 4 of my favorite words on the planet. Essentially, in this version of our world, people have trouble retaining their memories, and music is used as a form of communication and a form of telling someone how to go places. Music is just almost a language that they speak, apart from just English. And the prose in this novel is absolutely beautiful. As a musician, I really appreciated the way that Anna Smale wove all of these musical terms into the vocabulary of the book. I just thought this book was incredibly intriguing and engrossing and beautifully written, and the world was so rich, and I loved everything about this book, and it 100% exceeded my expectations. And given that explanation, I gave it 10 stars out of 10. The next book on this list is another February read. In fact, I actually ended up rereading the first book in the series and then moving on to this one because of The Chimes by Anna Smale, and that book is The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon. The Chimes really put me in a fantasy dystopian in England mood, and that's exactly what the Bone Season series is. I read the first one in 2014, and it was my second favorite book that I read all year, and then I read The Mime Order in February, and it was just so amazing. If you don't know what the series is about, essentially the main character, Paige, lives in London, but it's a dystopian London in like 2050, I want to say, and she is a clairvoyant in a world where clairvoyance is illegal. Not just using your clairvoyance, but being clairvoyant. And Paige is a very unique type of clairvoyant called a dreamwalker, and she is part of an underground clairvoyant gang within London. And this series is becoming one of my all-time favorites very quickly. Both of the books have been amazing so far, and despite not thinking that the Mime Order could live up to the super high expectations that the Bone Season set, it did. I would still say that I prefer the Bone Season because I'm a sucker for world building, and the Bone Season gave me so much world building. But the second book was also really amazing, and I gave it 10 stars out of 10. The next book on this list is actually a series, and typically I rank books in a series separately, but I read all of the books in this series within the past few months, and I really think that the series as a whole stands higher in my favorites than each of the individual books does, so I decided to put it in one big category, lump it all together, and that is the Death Note manga series by Tsugumi Ohba. Individually, I gave every single volume in the series between 8 stars out of 10 and 9.5 stars out of 10. And because of that, 5 out of the 6 volumes got 4 stars out of 5, while the last volume got 5 stars out of 5. And that's why I decided to lump the whole series together, because individually each of these volumes wouldn't have gotten themselves onto this list, but when I lumped them all together, this definitely belongs in the top 5 things that I've read so far this year. The overarching story within this series is amazing. The characters are so interesting and well fleshed out, and really enjoyable to watch. I have a full video where I reviewed both the anime and the manga, which I will leave up in the cards. I would definitely suggest that you check that out because that goes into full detail into my thoughts and opinions on the series, and since I did do that whole video, I'm not going to go into that here. But seriously, I completely fell in love with this series. I binge watched the anime. It's just a phenomenal story, and it definitely belongs up here among the 5 best things that I've read this year. The next book on this list is one that I actually have with me, and that is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I've talked at length about how much I love Brandon Sanderson. I have read, I think, 9 of his books at this point, and I have been impressed with every single one of them. And this one is among the top 3 for sure. Once again, I do have a full video review on this book, which will be linked in the cards, so I won't go into full detail on my opinions about this, but I loved it so much. I've talked at length about how much I love the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, specifically The Final Empire. And while I definitely still prefer that trilogy and The Final Empire, this one is right up there with it. I gave Warbreaker a full 10 out of 10 stars. I could not put this book down. I loved the magic system, I love the characters, I love the world. Brandon Sanderson can do no wrong. And the 5th and final book on this list is, not surprisingly, another Brandon Sanderson book. It's The Way of Kings, which is the first book in the Stormlight Archive. I was so proud of myself when I finished this book because it took me like 2 weeks and it is 1,000 pages long, but it was such a rewarding 1,000 pages. I've admitted that it took me a while to get into this, but once I did, there was no looking back. This world is so fully fleshed out, the characters are so interesting and diverse, and everything about this book is just super intriguing and interesting. Obviously, this is a 1,000-page book, which is the first book in a 10-book series, so it's very difficult to explain what this book is about, but it's essentially a epic high fantasy novel. There are just way too many things to say about what this book is about, but it's just really fantastic, and Brandon Sanderson is a genius when it comes to writing. I haven't continued on in the series yet, mostly because the next book is just as massive, but once I am in the mood for it and I have taken a sufficient break from the massive books, I will definitely be continuing to Words of Radiance, and I know I will love it. Also, this is the only book on this list that has gotten 9.5 stars out of 10. The only reason it was docked half a star was because I took a while to get into it, but that's to be expected given that it's the first book in a long series and it's a massive first book. So those are the top 5 books that I've read so far this year. I actually went back and I thought about the books that were on my top 5 list midway through last year, and I definitely think that while I did really enjoy the books that I read last year, these 5 books are a much stronger, much better list. Like I said, not that the books that I read last year are not a great group of books, but I feel like I've just read some really amazing stuff this year, and there were a couple more books that I really wanted to add to this list and couldn't because it was only a 5-book list. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!